A 14-year-old boy went missing earlier today in Samaria in the West Bank. He left to graze sheep. Hours later, the herd came back without him, since that is an area where some Jews live surrounded by Palestinians. It is, I wouldn't say assumed, but there is, a concern that he may have been taken hostage or killed. And this is what Israel is living with regularly, and it is living with that regularly because it chooses to live with that regularly. An operation, a military operation in the West Bank, uh, would have been justified long before October 7th, but I personally find it like baffling that this wasn't even raised as a serious option. That what is done in Gaza is not enough for Gaza, but also not enough in terms of what needs to be done in the West Bank. Terrorist attacks are happening regularly from coming out of the West Bank. They're not successful enough, I guess, to merit an operation like October 7th. They're not successful enough yet. And Israel, I guess, is waiting for an attack that is successful, like it is waiting for an attack from Iran. This is what Israel does nowadays. It waits to be attacked. It waits for its people to be murdered, and then it apologetically does some limited military response that it then gets criticized for. I'm sure, calls for a ceasefire in the West Bank are already starting. Anyway, I'm joined by Kirk, Morgan, Nathan. Hey guys, Nathan, I'll go to you first because you are in Israel, uh, I believe. Yeah.
I am.
So your thoughts, and if you have any updates, because this is an ongoing story.
No, I skimmed through the Hebrew websites before the podcast, but I didn't see any updates. So I guess nobody knows anything. For me, this is high probability that he probably was kidnapped or something happened to him, something violent. But I mean, we don't know for sure. So, hopefully that's not the case. But the difference between Gaza and the West Bank is that if, or I should say, usually when something like this happens, it can't last that long. So the Israeli intelligence and Israeli army will be able to find what happened, discover, where he is or who kidnapped him in a fairly short period of time. I mean, unless they've been building tunnels, in the West Bank that the Israeli intelligence doesn't know about, I would assume that they will get to the people again if this is actually what happened. They will get to them pretty fast, probably in less than a week. That's my take.
Kirk.
Since we brought Iran up, and this, you talk about, appeasement just leads to more situations like this where innocents from Israel get kidnapped, perhaps taken hostage. You look at the history with Iran shortly after the revolution, a lot of American diplomats were taken hostage, and they didn't really pay much of a price for that. And now it's over 40 years later, and now we're in a situation where this Iran-backed terrorist group, Hamas, which has been governing Gaza for nearly 20 years at this point, is taking more Americans hostage like they did on October 7th. And now the United States is all worried that Iran is going to get further involved in this conflict between Israel and Hamas. And yeah, I guess this is just more proof of what happens when you appease your enemies and do nothing, as Razi said. As you said that Israel just waits to get attacked so that they can retaliate, which is results in innocents in Israel getting either kidnapped or getting killed.
Morgan.
There are some photos that came out of kind of the local IDF commanders gathered around a table, taking it very seriously. They've cordoned off, I think, 2 villages where I suppose they suspect he might be being held. And I guess the first impression is that the IDF takes this very seriously, as they should. And it goes to show how much value they place on one life of an Israeli citizen. And unfortunately, they're just so seldom able to show that same dedication to saving Israeli citizens in the case of the hostages in Gaza. And I presume that's not because they don't want to, it's because they're not allowed to in many cases. And, hopefully they find this kid very, very quickly before anything should happen to him. But as we all know, violence in the West Bank is hardly a new phenomenon. And this story is still unfolding, so we'll see whether he's found and in what state. But you'd have to think that if they've kidnapped him, that they're going to hopefully keep him alive. And it's a sorry situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned the villages that are cordoned off. Maybe I won't attempt to read it. Well, one is Duma and another is I won't try to read that. But anyway, yeah, what is Israel telling those who want to take hostages, those who who might find themselves in a situation where they're cordoned off, their village is closed. Maybe Israel will say, you know what? No food or medicine goes into these villages until you bring back the hostage. They know because Israel has already shown its weakness after October 7th. It's shown its weakness before October 7th. It's shown its weakness in every negotiation where the Palestinians are rewarded for the fact that they are terrorists. And yeah, there's Kirk, you mentioned a hostage crisis with Iran and the fact that that was a great, very clear statement by the U.S. to Iran. This is a good thing. This is how you win against us. You do these kind of things, kinds of things. And Israel made that statement very clearly in the Gilad Shalit deal. Wanting to save the lives of your people, that's a basic thing that the government should do. But of course, if Gilad Shalit is held in Gaza, you can also go about it a different way. You can say, here's a neighborhood. That neighborhood no longer exists. Anybody in any other neighborhood know anything? Because yours might be next. And we'll go neighborhood by neighborhood, like the US did with Japan. The US dropped a nuclear bomb and Japan could have surrendered. They didn't. There was another one. There could have been more. They surrendered in time. And with the Palestinians, this would have been an approach that works. And as I think I said this just now on TDO, but it definitely bears repeating that even with hostage negotiations, you can see the difference between the negotiation in November when Israel put some military pressure on Hamas and the deal was 50 hostages for 150 terrorists, none of whom succeeded to murder their victims, to now where Israel is offering 900 terrorists, including 100 murderers, for 40 hostages who Hamas says they no longer have 40 living hostages. This is at a time right now when there is a de facto ceasefire because Israel is not acting against Hamas. Nathan.
Yeah, I think there's such a weird phenomenon going on. I don't know if it's weird is the correct term, but it's more like just sheer insanity. Because so for years the left has treated Israel's kind of security situation, facing the surrounding Arabs, as they're just these crazy entity that if you just trigger them in the wrong way, we're just going to start a war. So, or you're just going to anger them, and they're just going to be, very angry, and you're like, so if you do anything that's perceived as provocative or anything like that, then you're the crazy one, because and you're playing with fire. Like these are the kind of idioms that they're using, and you'd think that maybe after October 7, they would say, oh, wait a minute. No, it's not that we can do something provocative to cause this, or, we shouldn't just we shouldn't accept this kind of living. Like, we shouldn't accept the fact that some people are just, they just want to kill you, and something that you do miscalculate, then okay, then you're bringing this upon yourself. Like, no, that's not your fault. You have the responsibility to defend yourself, to defend your right to live, and to hell with anyone who might be triggered by their irrational mystic ideologies. So anyway, so you'd think that after October 7th they would change this attitude, but I see this frequently in Israel. They continue to have this attitude towards the West Bank. So, okay, October 7th happened, and you have to do something with Gaza. So you enter Gaza, and you enter war. But with the West Bank, oh, no, don't try to anger them. Like, don't do anything that will start to, will cause an escalation of the situation. And I say, why not escalate the situation? Go to war with the West Bank and Gaza, defeat both, just eradicate the militants in both places. I mean, if there was anything to learn about October 7th, is that you have to act preemptively. You can't just wait for them to massacre you. You can't just wait for them to build up their power until they have the means to inflict really bad results upon you. So, and it's like Israel has not learned anything, and it's just the same old slogans and idioms and bromides that, just don't start now anything in the West Bank, because we don't want to upset them, and we have things to deal with in the Gaza Strip. Now, I mean, there could be a legitimate claim in terms of strategy, saying, look, we have most of our army now in Gaza, so we don't want to spread our forces too much, and I can understand that. But most of the military is like, most of the reserves, they went home. There's no, I mean, you have, like, that's not the problem right now with the West Bank.
Yeah, I completely agree. The war, even in the context of Iran, the war that Israel is trying in the West, and the U.S. are trying to avoid by de-escalation, is nothing compared to the war they'll get when Iran decides that they are now ready for a full-scale war. And yeah, you get to that point, you will regret not escalating sooner, Kirk.
Yeah, and you got to wonder if actions like this are largely a result of both Israel waffling and wavering a bit to international pressure, but also the United States putting pressure on Israel, waffling and wavering in its support for Israel in their retaliatory efforts in Gaza. And on top of that, we've talked about the stories about the Houthis commandeering vessels in that region. And now we get these stories. And on top of that, we've been seeing all week reports and headlines that Iran might be getting ready for an attack. And yeah, that's the signal that Israel and the United States have put out for the last few months, is that yeah, we'll cave to international pressure, we'll entertain ceasefire talks and negotiations, and all the while again, who the Houthis are getting away with commandeering ships, and yeah, you could say that might invite more escalation from bad players in the West Bank and countries like Iran.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Morgan?
I mean, just off the back of what you were saying, Natan, I can't remember the phrase exactly, but the IDF policy in the West Bank for the longest time, I don't know whether they still follow this, it was a phrase something like non-presence or something like that, where they didn't want to impinge too much upon the lives of Palestinians in the West Bank, which, if you were to compare that to the strategy that you mentioned, Razi, in Japan, is a totally different approach. And if you were to compare the two outcomes, America, which impinged very much on the lives of the Japanese, was utterly successful in de-radicalizing or de-escalating that society from the violence that it was engaged in. And the IDF has unfortunately been not successful at all with the West Bank, and has shown, whether it's due to international pressure or just bad ideas, I'm not sure, an absurd generosity in allowing the creation of the Palestinian Authority, who I think, if correct me if I'm wrong, to this day still offer that kind of a pension scheme to the families of people who blow themselves up and kill Israelis. And I think it's still,
Martyrs one, yeah.
yeah, and it still goes into the millions every year that they dole out for that. And not that I think the Palestinian Authority is going to cave to this, but surely any justified response to that kind of thing is going to have to be for the IDF to put the clamps on them and a lot of pressure and say, you stop this right now, or we're really going to do something about this. And if you don't, then what you do is telegraph weakness and the ability for them to continue doing what they're doing, whether it's coming directly from the Palestinian Authority or whether it's just coming from people on the ground who want to kidnap a young boy.
I think this attitude, this whole approach, it stems directly from the just war theory. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, and I haven't personally read just war theory works, but I mean, this is the kind of idea that came from St. Augustine and then was modernized into a secular, I guess, argument by Michael Walzer in the 20th century, which ethically, the way that I understand it, it says that your right to self-defense starts only when you know, like with absolute certainty, that your life is in danger, like at that very moment. So let's say, you enter Gaza and you're not allowed to just shoot if you're, if there's some suspicion of a terrorist activity, or if you have just suspicions that there's some danger from somewhere. You have to validate with epistemological certainty that yes, your life right now is in objective danger. Like you could lose your life right now. That's the only time where you can actually act and defend yourself. And I mean, this is completely irrational. This stems, I mean, from altruism. I mean, altruism is what drives this approach, because I think the kind of objective and rational way to look at this, which with an egoist basis, is you're entering a war zone. That's it. You're in danger. Like you don't need to look for a concrete bound danger right at that moment. Like if you're in a war zone, you're in danger. And if someone threatens you with violence, that's it. Like he threatened you and you are in danger. So you have the right to act. You have the right to defend yourself. You don't have to wait for the very last second before, someone pulls the trigger at you to actually defend yourself. No, you can defend yourself much, much sooner than that if there is an objective identification of a threat. So it's like they use these terms self-defense and danger and objectivity, but it's completely distorted. Everything about it is distorted. It's like they just use these as package deals. And yeah.
Jonathan Honig, thank you for the super chat. Jonathan agrees with you and says the threat of force is force. I just want to update. I don't know how significant this is, but I'm reading the news as it comes in that there were 50 rockets fired from Lebanon to the north of Israel. Now, this happens a lot. Nathan, I don't know if 50 is a lot for a day but this is all.
I think it is.
Yeah, and again, this could be an indication that something is coming. We'll update about anything that happens in the next 40 minutes. If there's a reason to, we'll also have a special episode of the Daily Objective.
I hope
Kirk.
I don't need to go to the bomb shelter as we speak.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll catch it live. You can don't know if there's a Wi-Fi in the bomb shelter. So
doesn't work that well.
Kirk.
Yeah, you said that it came from Lebanon. So I guess just speculating here, it sounds like that may have come from Hezbollah, which we know is one of Iran's proxies. And last night I was watching a certain news channel where they were talking about this topic of Iran getting involved, and they were talking about like, well, the United States and Israel probably shouldn't get involved with Iran if it uses one of its proxies, only if Iran like launches directly from Tehran. And now we're seeing this. It's like, yeah, if Iran knows that it won't get any consequences or blowback if it just acts through Hamas or some other Islamist terror group, then why not go that route? Because people will, as we've seen even with Hamas, people will try to separate the two and say, even though Iran has been a huge funder of Hamas for years, if not decades at this point, yeah, well, Iran has no role to play here in Gaza. I think I made that mistake earlier on this very show when I said, I talked as if Iran is not already involved in this war. Like, yeah, not directly. They're not like directly launching from their territory, but as far as I'm concerned, they're a huge supporter of what's going on. And now you have their supreme leader mouthing off on Twitter, talking about how, I mean, he's been doing this long before October 7th about how, this whole Zionist regime in their eyes needs to go. And they think of Hamas as a, quote unquote, resistance movement. So.
Yeah, and just to point out, there are rockets being fired daily by Hezbollah from Lebanon. I think this is as Nathan says, this is more than usual. This is not the attack that is coming from Iran, presumably, at least in terms of it. It certainly doesn't match their rhetoric, but the north of Israel is under daily fire. And Israel, that's another example, just like the West Bank, where Israel is not acting until something is disastrous enough that it has justification. I mean, it is acting in that it bombs them here and there, but it is not acting in a way that it can to prevent it from continuing to happen because Israel's allies won't like it, or Israel thinks it's too difficult. I don't know what their excuse is. Morgan. Nathan, you want to jump in?
No, I just wanted to ask if it mentioned where the rockets were fired at, but I can look it up myself.
You're muted, Razi.
Oh, so I was saying not in the update that I was looking at. It just said towards Israel.
Okay, we'll try to figure out during the live.
Yeah, Morgan.
I mean, just on Hezbollah, I haven't been following that kind of front of the war really so much since the early days, but kind of like you were saying, Nathan, it's understandable, I guess, if the IDF wants to keep its focus on Gaza as much as possible and not have to engage too much on multiple fronts like they may have to do in the West Bank, like you were kind of saying. But if what they're doing is just kind of fending off Hezbollah just to keep them at bay for a little bit, then unfortunately, this is just going to continue. The people who live in the north of Israel are going to have to continue being evacuated from their homes. And it's a real sign of dishonor to the international community about how much pressure is put on to Israel to not escalate the situation. Because escalation is not something which is chosen by Israel, so to speak, and it's a situation that's brought to them by Hezbollah doing these kind of things. And so the war really already is on multiple fronts. And what are you going to do about it? And again, strategically, it might be understandable for them to be doing this, but if they're not engaging as much as they need to in the north, out of a desire to not be too offensive to international sentiment, then that is a real dereliction of the duty which they hold as the protectors of their nation.
I mean, and also who benefits from these kind of irrational standards for war? I mean, it's not the good, right? It's not the one who is more powerful. It's the one who's less powerful. And I mean, yeah, so it's just like, I mean, Iran, Hamas, all of these evil regimes, they just use these quote unquote principles that are really just it turns war into this game. Like it's just, oh, you'll escalate a little bit and then I will escalate a little bit, and it just works for the benefit of the evil, of the one who, who has less power, who can't destroy you right away. But if you can, as the good, if you can destroy with a completely, with full scaling of the war, like a full escalation, then you should just do it.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of, powerful militarily. I don't know that Israel is more powerful than Iran. I'm at least in terms of the power that they show, I'm not impressed, by Israel. But yeah, it is a question, as you said, it's the good who is playing by rules that the other side, that is the only reason that other side is the only reason there is a war. They do not need to abide by those rules, and of course they don't. So, which is why, there's a question now on, who are they going to attack, or where are they going to attack? Will it be military bases? Will it be civilians? I mean, we know that Israel is going to play by the rules, unfortunately, and those rules mean that if Israel strikes back, then it'll be against military, Iranian military. But we don't know what Iran's going to do. We don't know a lot about what Iran has. I know people like to think that our intelligence knows everything about everything that's going on in every bad country in the world. I don't really trust that that is the case. And yeah, again, I think if Iran is not ready yet for all-out war, that is exactly the reason why all-out war needs to happen now. Kirk.
Yeah, I want to add to what Natan was saying. I've been thinking the same thing. I think it was last week or the week before, the United Nations tweeted something out about rules of war, and it's like people bring this up like they're talking about like war as if it's like a game of football, and Israel just got flagged for like a false start or pass interference and needs to back up 10 yards. It's like, no, this is a matter. War is a matter of life or death, and as as Razi just said, it's always the good that are the good, like Israel, that are expected to abide by these rules of war, because we know that the bad guys are not really interested in doing that.
Morgan.
Just on the Iranian military strength, there was a lot of articles in the Telegraph and the Spectator talking about that yesterday. And supposedly Iran has about 1.2 million soldiers. And I'm not exactly sure on the IDF strength, but I think is it around 200,000, something like that. So certainly in terms of soldiers, Iran's got a lot more. But supposedly the IDF has about double the number of tanks and is a bit equally matched in terms of air power, something like that. So it's probably, unless Iran marches a huge army through Iraq, probably it's not going to be fought on the ground. It's going to be fought by the means, and probably Israel can hold its own there. But then, as you say, the worry is that also Hezbollah is going to come in as well, who are very well trained and quite powerful. So it's a worrying situation. And the Israeli military leaders, again, it's understandable if they want to clear out Gaza first, although they aren't showing much strength in terms of Rafah, in terms of going into there. This has been delayed ad infinitum now. Now, presumably they are at some point, and Netanyahu said that he has some date in mind for when they're going to do it. But there's been just too much delaying, I think, in the conflict overall, you could say, but particularly in this iteration of it that's broken out since October 7th. And if, it's looking very likely now that Israel is going to have to fight on other fronts. Therefore, you need to get Gaza over and done with, which means going into Rafah. And it means pacifying anything that's going to come from the West Bank, which the kidnapping of this young boy is just a microcosm of.
Yeah, so something by the way, you mentioned tanks. Tanks are not going to come into play in this conflict, even if it's direct. I mean, if it's directly between Israel and Iran, Israel's advantage in tank numbers isn't unless Moses comes back and parts Jordan and Iraq the way he parted the Red Sea. I don't see how that's going to happen. And yeah, and I hope I'm wrong. I'm not confident about Israel's abilities when it comes to such a conflict with both the Iranian army and with Iranian proxies that are literally surrounding all of Israel's population from every direction, I think this can be very bad now. And if it doesn't happen now, it will only get worse because these enemies will only get stronger. But I want to talk about go back to the topic for today and talk about the issue of settlements in general, because our viewers, if you haven't heard the story about the possible kidnapping of this boy, you'll probably hear about this story in a different form, in that settlers attacked Palestinians, which may very well have been the case, by the way. I don't know. I'm always skeptical of these stories, because I know that, B'Tselem, an anti-Israel organization that operates in Israel, famously, openly gave Palestinians cameras to document attacks on them, which of course, it's easy to then manufacture such attacks and start recording when they happen. In this case, I kind of, I don't think settlers by and large are the most rational group of people, and so it is possible that this is happening. But this incident aside, we hear from even Israel's so-called allies that the settlements are an obstacle to peace, which is a very bizarre statement for me. This is actually what, as a leftist Israeli teenager, this is what made me leave the Israeli left. I didn't see how, I was all for, yeah, let's give them whatever, let's sign a peace deal, and have a two-state solution. But the one thing that didn't connect, even as a teenager, was, why does the future Palestinian state have to be Jew-free if this state is going to have live in peace and security with alongside the Jewish state, which of course will maintain its 20% Arab population? So yeah, we hear this, and this is kind of, I would say, should be something that you can point to and say, all right, if this is what you think the problem is, then you are proving that peace is not possible with the Palestinians. That is my general take on this. Nathan.
I think there's a lot to unpack here. So maybe I can start with like the plausible maybe idea why people think that settlements are immoral, or why there are such a controversy. Like, why is it so why is this issue so disputed? Why does it get so many people like morally enraged or whatever? I mean, is there any other place in the world where settlements are are controversial like this? I mean maybe there is, but I don't know of any other place. So I think like the position why it's maybe a little bit plausible is that the Israeli settlements, or just the Zionist movement in general, it was always like embedded with an ideology. So if we go back in history, the when the Zionists first came and they started to build these villages and towns and cities and settlements, it wasn't like a if you live in America and you just want to buy a house and you go and you buy in the suburb, and like there's no ideology behind that, right? But the early Zionists, so they went there and they were thinking, well, we're building this not just because we want to build a home and to live in a home, but there's also the kind of political goal of achieving a national statehood for Jews. So that was like embedded from the start. But after Israel was formed in 1948, I guess this issue was just kind of removed from the table, because, okay, now that Jews had a homeland, so now you could just go around and, and buy and sell houses just like any other place. But then what happened after 1967, after the Six-Day War, Israel conquered all this land. It, I think, tripled its territorial size. And then there was a question, well, what does Israel do with this land, with this conquered territory? And Israel didn't really know what to do. It didn't know if it wanted to annex it, if it just wanted to hold it as a kind of security buff, a security buffer. And what happened was that the religious section within Zionism, they were inspired and influenced by the early Zionists, by the secular Zionists, and they were thinking, and their motivation was religious. So they believe in, the land of Israel, it was given by God, and we should settle all of this land. So they were thinking, well, let's just do what the early Zionists did, and let's go there and we'll settle, whether it's legal or not. And legal, I'm talking about the kind of Israeli law, not international law. So there were all these. So like this whole thing was kind of conceptualized in a ideological framework. So in that sense, the question of settlements was always political, and that's why you could say, okay, well, that's why maybe people, they look at these settlements and they're thinking about this in political terms as well. But if we step back from it, and this is kind of my point, I think, whatever the motivation of these people are, at the end of the day, what's like metaphysically, naturally, what's going on is human beings, individuals, are going, on top of a hill where there's it's just barren land, nobody lives there, and they're building a house. It's like, that's it. And from a, just from a rational perspective, there's nothing immoral going on here. And but I guess that what's happening with these ideas of just the conventional tribalist and just collectivist views out there is that people don't look at it this way. They don't just say, okay, well, this land belongs to no one, and an individual comes, he builds a house, that's it, that's his. They view it as, well, this land belonged to a people, and this land is owned collectively by someone else, and now you, as a part of a group, you're coming and you're stealing this land. So the whole framework of how this is being viewed and evaluated is completely tainted and completely corrupt from a moral perspective. And
Yeah.
I mean, the Israeli Jews do this too, right? So you could blame them. And you should, I think, criticize them for their views, but it's not that the act itself of just building houses is immoral or anything like that.
Yeah, and definitely I would criticize any Israeli Jew who says, well, all this land is ours, we need to kick out all the Arabs, although what you do in Gaza is a different thing. But I see, one of our regular anti-Israel people in the chat saying something about stealing people's houses. So that's not a thing. But the thing is, if that actually happens, if an Israeli were to go into, of course, look what happened today. Somebody was most likely kidnapped while, just doing what he was normally doing. Of course, if anybody actually went into a Palestinian controlled village and tried to take over a house, they would be lynched. And we know that because we've seen people accidentally go into Palestinian territories and get lynched. So this is not a thing, what you're saying, but what you're, I'm going to go full, what's her name from the Jordan Peterson interview and say what I think you're trying to say, or what you really mean, however she put it, is that all the land belongs to the Palestinians. And that also is not, as you said, not that metaphysically, it's not a thing in reality that, I'm Arab, so everything from here to from the river to the sea is mine. And if you're a Jew and you build a house in the middle of nowhere, you are a colonialist, settler, whatever term they want to give it. So, yeah. I want to thank James Wadsworth for the very generous super chat. We'll get to your question after we get to Nathan and to Kirk and Morgan on settlements. Kirk.
Yeah, from what I've read on this topic, and this is a topic that Elon Journo covers in his book, What Justice Demands, and he, starts off by talking about how complicated this issue is because it cuts across Israeli law and domestic policy and international diplomacy. And then, of course, he has to open the can of worms that is international law and how that muddies the waters on this topic. You could say, from what I could tell at least, this seems to be one of the more legitimate grievances from some Palestinians, not obviously like as a collective, but some Palestinians against the Israeli government, which I guess has had a history of taking land and trying to dole it out, and religious zealots trying to develop on land that they're not supposed to. And I think the proper solution to this is a system that respects and protects private property rights, which Israel also has a history of doing. He also talks about the history of the Israeli courts telling the Israeli government that they're not allowed to, redistribute property, and giving certain Palestinian victims their day in court where they win various court cases. And then he also adds at the end of this topic how Israel is the best country in that region at settling these disputes, and that you wouldn't see such resolutions in countries like, say, Saudi Arabia and other neighbors in the region. I'm trying to find, here it is. Yeah. Yeah, he mentions, if they lived in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, or elsewhere in the Middle East, and some comparable wrong were done to them, they would have no reason to expect justice in the courts. And worse, by speaking up against their government policies, they risk having the government inflict further injustices against them. So, to wrap this up from my end, you could say this is one of the more legitimate grievances, although you could also say it's often a red herring because, again, a lot of Israel's enemies are not really interested in setting up a system that would adjudicate such injustices.
Morgan.
I agree with you, Kirk, that it's a red herring in the sense that the way that settlements are always brought up is as, in a sense, a reason for the conflict. Biden commented on them recently, and David Cameron, and probably Western leaders, going back decades and decades. But it's important to remember that the first settlements pop up only after the 1967 war. So that's after Israel has already fought 2 wars for its existence, one when it's still just a natal state, and one which was instigated, by Egypt, because the whole existence of Israel is a stain on the honor of Egypt and blah, 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 right? So the grievance from the local Arab population or countries against Israel predates the settlements. And so the whole idea that the settlements are a driving issue in the conflict isn't the really right way to think about it. And settlements, again, kind of ropes in a number of different things that can be either towns which are built on land which is legitimately purchased, or it can be situations like you say, Natan, where there's just basically no one on the land who owns it, or it can be when the more messianic settlers who believe the whole land is promised to them by God or whatever build on land which might be legitimately owned by a farmer. And in that case, that might be one of the more legitimate grievances you're referring to, Kirk. So the settlements aren't a cause of the conflict. And if there are the legitimate cases where there's a farmer who says, look, I own this land, this is my private property, then that's something that should be respected. And the people who are encroaching upon it shouldn't be allowed to do that. And it's bad to the extent that they are allowed to do that. But people who make a lot of hay out of the settlements and say, look, this is a cause of the whole war and Israel's bringing it on themselves, are either stupid or they're being dishonest.
There's also the fact that specifically in Gaza, I don't think Israelis have had settlements there since they pulled out of Gaza in 2005, unless Natan or Razi can correct me on that.
Yeah, I mean, no settlements. Yeah, if I can just comment on the grievances issue. So, I mean, essentially, I don't think this is what drives the conflict or the people who are critical against the settlements. So I think essentially they just view it as, well, this entire land belongs collectively to the Palestinians, and then any attempt to settle in that land is a kind of colonialist Western expansion, against the indigenous people of this area. And I think that's kind of the way this entire thing is framed. Now, if you want to really dive into the details and try to, figure out which strip of, particular strip of land belongs to who, and what is the legal precedent, and like on what legal basis is it even registered as land of someone. I mean, it's so complex. You have the Israeli courts who do, adjudicate these issues, but the Israeli courts are not that big on private property anyway. And so, I mean, even they have a kind of collectivistic view of, well, who should own land. And so, I mean, the entire thing, and it's so you have land that was allegedly owned by Arabs under the Turkish, empire, but then it passed hands like to the British, and like you can't even find the guy who is allegedly the owner of the land. And you, even if in cases where Jewish settlers do enter Palestinian homes, I mean, sometimes what happens is they'll pay cash for the Palestinian to buy their home, but then the Palestinian, he can't admit that he sold a house to a Jew because there's a death penalty to sell homes to Jews. So I mean, so after the settlers go in, he says, "Oh, they just invaded my home," and I mean, he just is trying to stay alive that way. So I mean, it's so complex, and it's so yeah. I mean, none of the people who are so like talk about this issue with conviction, like, oh, you stole land, like they didn't go in and search all the facts. Like I admit, I don't go around and research this like to the bare details, and I mean, it's just it really is complex.
No, but even the person in the chat who mentioned this then clarified that he meant that, he said houses, but then in his following messages, it wasn't houses, it was just, this is Palestinian land.
There you go.
So yeah, I'd love for some of these pro-Palestinian people to ever bring actual arguments rather than, we hear the same slogans. We know the slogans. I don't think you're convincing anybody with your slogans. I'd love to. I think, if I decided to shed any last shred of decency and morality and decided to join the pro-Palestinian side, that I could make better arguments than they do. But I'm not going to attempt that.
They don't need facts. They create reality with their own consciousness. They don't need facts. Who needs facts today?
And yet they make up facts and then shift them as needed. So a couple of things before we get to James's question. So I saw that there was another report that there were two drones, like explosive drones, that were shot down as well. I saw, I think I lost this comment, but Paul said in the chat somewhere, oh yeah, Gaza Health Ministry report handed to UN as confirmed death toll figure has been inflated by up to 12,000. If you can let us know where that report is from, because I couldn't find it. I mean, the only thing that would surprise me about that is the Gaza Health Ministry admitting that. We, of course, can say you heard it here first, although I don't. This is not the first place where it was said, but we did have two separate. We had an episode of the reality show. We had an episode of the Daily Objective. That was, I think, over a month ago, where we actually went through how it is that they lie about those numbers. Go check those out. Yeah, that's the thing generally with smearing and lying, is you just need to put that out there, and people will buy into it. And I think we've also done shows on the Palestinian propaganda machine, and how people among the Palestinians put stuff out there, and then it's just there, like the Al-Ahli hospital bombing where 500 people died. This was the report. immediately after that happened, and the fact that a couple of hours later, it was clear there was a Palestinian rocket misfired. That didn't change. I mean, it changed a little bit because now some media outlets say Gaza Health Ministry run by Hamas. They don't always do that, but they do that sometimes. But I'm pretty sure at least a month ago or so, last time I checked, Jeremy Corbyn's tweet from October 17th about Israel bombing the hospital was still up. So, yeah, and well, I think you've said enough about that. James asks, in the case of open war between Israel and Iran, what side do the Saudis take? That's a good question. I mean, if you ask, my guess, just from the reports, I'm not in touch with the Saudi royal family. I don't have sources there, but from what I read in the news, they would be probably officially not on Israel's side and unofficially at least allow Israel to use their airspace if needed. And that is as far as I know. But Natan, you might know more.
Not really. Sorry, but I would take your take. That's as far as I can assume. I mean, I don't know what kind of game the Saudis are playing. I don't know what their real motivations and goals are. I mean, there is at least seemingly, it looks like they do want to kind of westernize a little bit. I don't know. And they're kind of cozying up on the West, but on the other hand, I mean, they're still an Islamist state, and they have all these what are they called? The Salafi, I think that's their main ideology. That's like part of the state. So yeah, I don't know.
Kirk, Morgan, either of you, this was a very generous super chat. I wish I did have sources in the Saudi government so that I could answer it better.
Well, I met a minor member of the Saudi royal family once, although unfortunately I didn't ask him about geopolitics. I was talking to him about what tours of Edinburgh he wanted to go on. Look, I mean, I don't think it's exactly clear. Certainly, given their ideology and given their history, you'd have to expect that they would be in favor of the anti-Israel side. Now, I feel a bit dubious about whether they're going to do anything about it in terms of getting involved. I would be surprised, to be honest, if they were to do that. But ideologically, that's presumably where they would lean. What I would have to expect is that they would stay out of it and egg on Iran in effect. But I would be surprised if they were to commit any troops or any kind of military action, to be honest.
Oh yeah, that I absolutely do not expect them to do. Alexis, thank you for the super chat. Alexis asks, what short-term reaction should we realistically expect from Israel in case of Iranian escalation? What reaction would be possible if they really wanted to? So for the first question, I think the answer is it will be a proportionate response. That's, if Iran attacks military bases and a couple of dozen soldiers die, Israel will attack military bases and probably a couple dozen soldiers die. If it's I don't know. It's a bit more difficult to do a proportionate response if Hezbollah actually sends troops into Israel. If Hamas or whoever is operating in the West Bank sends troops to Israel. If the Houthis fire, I don't know. So yeah, in terms of what would be possible if they really wanted to, I mean, Israel, according to some unconfirmed, unverified sources, has nuclear bombs. So, a lot is possible. Nathan, please don't say anything that would get you in trouble, but what is your
I'll just tell you what I'll just say what I hope they do. I hope they bomb their oil fields. I think that's, at least from what I've heard or and read, it should be an easy job. Like I guess, eradicating their nuclear facilities is more problematic because they kind of spread them out, and who knows where they are. But from what I understand, the oil fields are right out there, and Israel should just bomb the hell out of them.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Kirk.
I don't really know enough about military and logistics and strategy. I know there's been a lot of speculation about whether or not, especially with their involvement in Gaza, whether or not Israel is equipped to go up against Iran right now, and that they would probably at least need help from the United States in terms of just weapons support. And now we're also getting reports that I guess Kuwait and Qatar, where the U.S. has military and Air Force bases, I guess they have reportedly said, I've only seen this on Elon Musk's website, so I don't know how true this is, but I guess Qatar and Kuwait have said that if the United States wants to get involved with Iran, that they cannot use their airspace. And now a lot of people are like, what good is having these military and Air Force bases in Qatar and Kuwait if they're going to tell us how to use them, which I think is kind of exposing who our real friends are in the region. Even more reason to be very supportive and friendly with Israel during these trying times. But yeah, I don't know if Israel is equipped to deal with it. Maybe some more military expert-minded people can inform us in the comment section after this goes live. But yeah, and then especially like during the Masa Amini protest, like I was warning them, like, is this going to be the end of the Islamic Republic of Iran? And yeah, that's what I'm most interested to see. Is this going to be the beginning of the end? And if Israel were to retaliate, maybe that might motivate the more rebellious elements within Iran to finally tell the Islamic Republic to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, that's what I would hope for. And by the way, if America actually, stood up for itself and for its allies, Qatar says you can't use our airspace. Well, we're gonna do something about it. Iran deserves this attack, and if you want to openly side with them, we will act accordingly, or however diplomats speak. Morgan.
Could you just repeat the original question for me quickly?
Yes, once I find it. Okay, it's two questions. What short-term reaction should we realistically expect from Israel in case of Iranian escalation? What reaction would be possible if they really wanted to? And let me also tell you, we have the briefly objective in less than a minute, so you don't have long to answer.
I mean, in terms of what short-term response from Israel you can expect, I mean, if it's a real escalation, i.e., if Iran goes to war, then there's no way that Israel can pull its punches about that. So that I think what you'd have to expect is that Israel goes all in and plays to win. And then, I'm sorry, the second bit is completely fallen out of my mind. But look, Iran, go on then, repeat it.
What reaction would be possible if they really wanted to?
Yeah, going to full war. I mean, look, if Iran decides to go to war with Israel, Israel does not have a choice. Like it can pussyfoot around some of these other things at the expense of its own citizens, but that's like real existential threat coming from Iran.
Sorry, guys. Links to find everybody are in the chat, but in the description. But we have to go. The Palestinian propaganda machine. That video is premiering now on the Briefly Objective. Go over, like it, share it. It's good. Thanks. We'll see you on the Daily Objective tomorrow.